It is my honor, pleasure, and duty to begin this new season of Difficult Dialogues. Here we are again for another episode of Difficult Dialogues, where we attempt to engage with brilliant people, major important questions of the day, some of them sometimes questions that are difficult to talk about. With us today is the Charles Titcomb Professor in the Department of Philosophy, as well as the Department of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. He's been there since the beginning of the new millennium, and it's our pleasure to have him with us here today. Among Tommie Shelby's many important books, I've got a couple of them here. One is his work, We Who Are Dark, The Philosophical Foundations of Black Solidarity. This book appeared when I was in 2005, when I was a professor at the University of Alabama, and had a great experience, great time teaching this course in that place where African Americans have a strong and long history of struggle against oppression. But his newest work, and one making quite a scene in this day in which our president raises the question, what do you have to lose to urban America and to African Americans in particular? And that work is Dark Ghettos, Injustice, Dissent, and Reform. And so with us here today to have a conversation around some of these issues is Tommie Shelby. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I would start out by that, taking off on that moment. This is Black History Month. This is February. Day before yesterday, President Donald J. Trump convened a group of African Americans to in commemoration of the beginning of Black History Month, but also as kind of a chat or a conversation about Black people in the United States of America. I note you weren't there. I note that Henry Louis Gates wasn't there. William Julius Wilson wasn't there. Many of your other illustrious colleagues at Harvard were not there. It seemed like it was more people in the entertainment industry and television industry. But be that as it may, it's the first time he's had anything yet signaled in his first couple of weeks in office about the issues of Black America, the issues of urban America, but before that, what we know is from the campaign trail. And it was his question that he put forward, what do you have to lose to not back a disruptor like himself, someone who was going to kind of come in and throw everything out that's been there before, all the liberal, all the neoliberal, all the Clintonian, all the Obama kinds of things that's been going on, and bring a complete new approach, new day to things. And he says, what do you have to lose? You're raising in Dark Ghettos that we should approach these issues more so than just from empirical angles, whatever, but from certain kinds of principles in thinking about the way forward from some of our from the dark ghettos, from the urban nightmares. How do you react if we right now, instead of in this little table in Amherst, if you were in the Oval Office and before Donald J. Trump and his cabinet, what would be your counsel on maybe the more important way to see urban America and the problems of urban America and the problems of African Americans in particular?
That's a hard question. I hope I'm not sitting in that chair answering that question. Well, I mean, he has tended to focus on law and order issues, on issues worrying about crime and violence. And so whenever he talks about Black Americans, he tends to focus on what do you call it, the inner city?
Chicago.
People use it. Exactly.
Yes.
We're thinking of poor Black neighborhoods in major metropolitan areas around the country. Of course, that's misleading in lots of ways because, first, most Black people are not poor, and even most of the poor don't live in such neighborhoods, so it's already a little bit off in terms of trying to understand this. But even in thinking about those neighborhoods, we think it is important to think about these Black neighborhoods where there's a really high concentration of disadvantage. I think what we really need to do is pull back from just trying to figure out some kind of law enforcement way to deal with everything that's going on. There's no denying that in some places, in some of these cities, there is violent crime on the streets, and it is threatening to residents in these neighborhoods, and that is something that needs to be responded to. And sometimes perhaps a law enforcement response makes sense. But I think we know, because these neighborhoods have been around so long, that we have to think broader about the kinds of lives that the people in these neighborhoods have, the constraints that they're under, and that's where one gets worried, because then when places the kinds of interventions, institutions we have built to kind of respond to things like lack of availability of housing, lack of affordable housing, quality schools, ways and income support for people who might have a hard time finding a way in our current economy. Those are the things that are kind of being wiped away, and what will remain is a punitive response, which I think will not really get to the heart of matters. So in a lot of ways, I guess if I had to say something, it would be, let's not focus solely on that piece of things, and think about the range of other institutions that we have in place to respond to some of the most disadvantaged in our country.
Talk about some of these principles or that you feel are important as we think through our urban crises, the situation that is going on in these areas, that, albeit not the totality of the Black experience or what Black people are going through, or urban America even is going through. Talk a little bit about some of those that you raise here in Dark Ghettos.
Sure. I mean, typically when people talk about these issues, they tend to focus on issues of race, and that's important, of course. There are questions about discrimination, whether in housing and employment and lending and other things. And those are serious issues, and we don't always have mostly don't have the best enforcement mechanisms to deal with those sorts of problems. There's also, of course, lingering racism in ordinary interactions and forms of bias that sometimes people aren't fully aware of, that affect people's life chances. And so clearly one will have to speak to those things. But it does seem to me that a lot of the issues, and colleagues of mine like William Julius Wilson and others you mentioned, who are not being called to been writing about these things for 50 years, they would point out that a lot of these issues have to do with the economy. And as a philosopher, I would say more precisely that it have to do with questions of economic justice. So people can disagree about how much economic inequality you can really justify to the people who are on the losing end. But it's really hard to justify the amount of inequality that we have right now. Most Americans, I think, it doesn't require that much to persuade them that, just because you happen to be born in a rich family, you shouldn't have everything laid out for you. And just because you happen to be born into a poor family, you shouldn't just be struggling and on a pathway to prison. So I think a principle like that, some philosophers like John Rawls, others have called it sort of fair equality of opportunity, where they think, look, we're sharing a society together. All of us are equals in that society. And we think that everyone should have the same prospects for achieving their ambitions, given their motivation to pursue those ambitions, and given the talents they have available to them. And that shouldn't be constrained by their class position, one they happen to be born into, which of course they had no choice in. So it seems to me that that's a discussion that people really don't want to have. It's just about economic inequality and how sharp it is, despite the fact that numerous books by reputable economists, not radical economists, have said this is unsustainable. You cannot have this level of inequality and expect citizens to feel like equals and participate in their society in ways that they can feel good about.
Well, if that is kind of a basic principle to operate from, it sounds then as though race in that instance is not the most important thing. And yet when I recall this book, you talked about two important aspects for understanding Black solidarity and a basis for Black solidarity. One is just it's fun and it's affirming. And then the second one, you said it's also important as a source of self-defense in a non-ideal world. Do you still believe that there is a basis for Black solidarity of some time in this time, or should, for African Americans to really move forward, we should return to, I'll say even as that, return to more of an approach that tries to reach out across all class lines, that plays down identity. If you think about it, in the late 19th century, we'd often create organizations with no mention of race in it, even though it would end up being a Black organization because of patterns of segregation. But at least it showed us as trying to not organize on any sorts of basis of racial solidarity. Where would you say we are now? This was over 10 years ago you wrote this. Do you still hold to some of those points about Black solidarity?
I do. I mean, these are the difficult conversations. I mean, one of the challenges, there are many challenges here. And one of the ones you're mentioning is the relationship between the kind of solidarity, the kind of felt sense of loyalty and identification that, say, Black people have felt for each other for many generations. And that can be a source of strength and a source of inspiration. People feel like they can act collectively on the basis of that. What I try to as a kind of concession to the worries about organizing around that, or real worries around that, is you don't have to build that always around organizations. That is, that solidarity can exist amongst people who are in multiracial organizations. Sure. And so I think part of what people reacted to, I think, in the late 60s and early 70s was to a sense that people who were not Black couldn't participate as equals in organizations fighting for racial justice. Now, on the other side, it does seem to me that it's not reasonable for people who are concerned about issues of racial justice or economic justice and how they're connected, and they almost always are. It's not reasonable to expect people who are not Black to just kind of be second-class citizens in that struggle. So I think both pieces have to be there. One of the other challenges has to do with class within the Black community. And part of what's at issue here is we do have a very large Black professional class. It's still fewer than we would like, and it's certainly not proportionate to our population numbers, but it's no longer simply token. Black people are in professional positions in every sector of the economy and all levels of government and the academy, not only in entertainment and sports. And it's also true that there are a number of cities, Baltimore being one, Detroit being others, Atlanta, where the Black professional class often holds municipal power. So it's a very different situation. So it's fraught. I mean, from the 60s, it's fraught. That relationship between the Black poor and that Black professional class is an uneasy one, a conflictual one. But I still think that there can be some solidarity there around some issues, right? Probably not going to get a great depth of commitment when it comes to a kind of militant attack on inequality. But I do think a lot of people feel that there's still a lot of racism and discrimination that people feel like they can be invested in. And we know for sure that even though, as I believe, a lot of the police hostility and sometimes violence directed toward Black people is typically directed toward the most disadvantaged Black people, and not typically directed toward the more advantaged Blacks, the more advantaged ones feel the vulnerability of, if you like, being mistaken, for one of those, or they worry about their sons and daughters whose, in terms of their self-presentation, sartorial style, are indistinguishable from the very disadvantaged Blacks. So that too is a place where I think people are able to find common ground and move forward, even if they can't, on the broader questions of neoliberalism and economic inequality, expect that kind of cohesion.
So you think there can be, so for example, for us as part of the managerial class, two college professors, our role, our place in the new waves of struggle with Black Lives Matter, other forms of organizing going on at the grassroots level among young people, some involving students, some not. Where do you think the role of professors, How can we play a role, do you feel?
Great. I mean, I tend to take my inspiration from W.B. Du Bois. As a person, I don't know if a Du Bois-like figure could be as effective in our time as he was in his time, because a lot of the work that he did and the impact that he had was with his pen.
That's right.
And that's a harder thing to do now. But there is such a thing, I think, as intellectual leadership. There is such a thing as being willing to take up the hard questions.
Harder because nobody's really reading or listening?
Yes. There's a lot less reading. There's a lot less reading, especially of serious, difficult books. And so for someone to write something like his Black Reconstruction in America, is a very long book, as you know, you can't really, a lot of people are not going to get very far into a book like that. Or even things of his that are not so long, but are challenging. The ideas are challenging. They require background knowledge maybe not people don't have. I think it's harder for someone writing in that fashion to get a hearing. I think it's harder to get people to pay attention to them. There are others who, maybe because they have greater oratorical skill and that's easier to take in, maybe because they're able to write in a pithier way and in short form, without forcing people to follow through lots of details, they tend to get more of a hearing. And I'm grateful for those people who are able to communicate important ideas to a broader audience. But I'd like to think that at least for people on college campuses who are in our classes and who do have the time to sit and read difficult books, that someone like a Du Bois or no one's like Du Bois, but someone attempting to aspire to be like Du Bois and do serious research, write difficult books about difficult matters, that they could get a hearing. And I think that work is still important. It's important for us to do that, to both produce that knowledge and to teach it to our students, and where possible to try to communicate it to a broader public beyond our classrooms. I think that work is important to do, and I try to do a little bit of it myself.
Very good. Thinking about the work today and thinking particularly in the realm of philosophy, help us to try to understand or delineate some of the differences that's going on, particularly within philosophy. And I don't just mean academic philosophy here, and I don't mean just among the philosophers trying to grapple with the issue of race and the salience of race in the world and in the field of philosophy. But what are some of the a little way in which some of us can kind of grasp what you all are doing in terms of philosophy to help make some sort of dent in this thing called racism? And because we recently had right around this table Charles Mills. I know there have been areas of common interest. I think he's in the blurb on one of these, or has written some things before about your works. But then it also seems some differences around the liberalism and the meaning of the approaches of people like John Rawls. If you could give us a little entry into where some of you all's debates are.
I can try to. And one thing to say is that philosophers, most of us are not empirical social scientists or historians. Most of the work we do, the skill set that we have to bring to these issues, has to do with broader conceptual analytical questions and normative questions about political morality and interpersonal morality. And there's a long history, obviously, certainly in the Western philosophical tradition and other traditions as well, of trying to think about, how should I live? How should I relate to others? How should my society be structured? Right. And so those are the issues that philosophers have taken up for a long, long time. So for those of us like Charles Mills and myself who are interested in these questions of race from the standpoint of political philosophy, we take up the perennial question about what does justice require, but by trying to bring issues of race into that conversation where it generally has not been within academic philosophy. So a lot of what we do is try to identify appropriate principles, giving them some precision, trying to explain how they can be defended, trying to show that they're not just a matter of people's preferences or whatever, or prejudices, but actually can be rooted in reason. People can give a reasoned defense of these principles that others can reasonably accept. I think that is where we try to put our energies. I mean, our disagreements these are the kinds of, reminds me of the kind of disagreements that Marx used to have, where they're very intense disagreements about things that most people who are not a part of that tradition have no interest in and wouldn't register. So we are, I think, on the same page about many things, and one of those things has to do with a tendency sometimes amongst Black intellectuals, especially those on the left, to be dismissive of the tradition of liberalism. So I think the two of us, are not the only ones, but among the ones who are willing to actually accept the label of a liberal, even though we both came to political philosophy through Marxism and still draw very much on Marx's ideas, but see great value in the liberal egalitarian wing of the liberal tradition, much value in the kind of systematic reflection on what kinds of inequalities you can really justify to your fellow citizens and to those outside your society. And I think liberal egalitarians have spent a lot of time thinking about that. There are other traditions which I also value, but they tend not to pursue, these normative questions in great depth or in quite the same level of systematic detail as those who take their insights and are in conversation with the broader liberal egalitarian tradition. That includes people like John Rawls and Ronald Dworkin and others. So that's sort of where we tend to come at these issues.
Right. How then, in conclusion for this episode, why do you feel the sense of, as has been referred to a lot in the media, of white nationalism seems to be on the rise so much? This idea of an America first, and especially of an America where the white foundations of America, the white builders of America are wanting to, there's a sense of need to be recognized. There's been some wrong that's been done to them, and now we're back to the fore with a vengeance. Where do you think that's coming from right now, and where is, and what has failed us in terms of all of our moral teachings and philosophical teachings over these last, I don't know, however many years, where it seemed like we had turned a corner on that and we had left that behind, and now we seem smack dab in it?
I wish I had a neat diagnosis. I think there are probably many factors that lead to this situation. Among those are things, trends that have been happening for a long time, which have to do with the place of people with, say, more limited skills in our economy. And you have an economy that tends to favor people with highly developed, often technical skills, and people who used to be able to get by with a high school education a little bit better, they're struggling, and they're struggling across the board. Sometimes they can't find work at all, and sometimes the work that they find is really irregular. They feel very insecure. I think that's a big part of it. The nationalism itself, I think, is always kind of been there. I mean, it is America. It's a pretty, there's a broader kind of like American nationalism. Yeah, that's a thing. I mean, that gets enunciated by liberals as well. So that's not new. The fact that it has this cast of focusing on white Christians, if you like, I mean, that's not new either. But it partly comes up, I take it, as a backlash against a sense of too much deference on the part of Democrats and maybe even some centrist Republicans, that they're giving too much deference to people who are brown and black. And that those people are not being held accountable and not expected to do what others are doing, and that those who are doing what they're supposed to be doing are not being helped and supported. And so I think that was, it was coming. It was, it was a kind of thing that maybe we should have expected, anticipated. And if you spend, as we have, now more than 20 years, those of us who do identify as liberals, trying to move more and more to the right, rather than trying to think about what it would mean to create a real society of equals, you got to expect this kind of backlash. That's not to excuse it. I think it's horrible, and it's the kind of thing that I would certainly condemn and not tolerate. But on the other hand, we have to think creatively about how to, rather than just allow those divisions to sort of get deeper, to try to find ways, maybe having difficult conversations about where there are where it is commonality, where we might be able to make some movement forward together.
So human first isn't completely out of the question.
If it is, we're all doomed, I think.
Well, I guess then what is out there that you're reading that you might, that you would want to big up today? We have your book already on the table. Is there something out there?
Question. I mean, I'm still a big fan of classics, so I often feel that, to go back to one of my heroes, to Du Bois, I had lots of disagreements with Du Bois, but I still feel like, I mean, he was talking about these issued when he was thinking about Reconstruction. Like, here's this moment for poor whites, newly freed persons to try to find some commonality, to try to build a true democracy, to try to extend what little democracy there is to the economic realm. And it was like missed opportunity after missed opportunity after missed opportunity. And that's the story, in many ways, of America. And that's the story of left of center politics, is trying to do something about that. And I feel like that's a place I always would go back to, reading that long book, Black Reconstruction, but other works of his. I think that, we're at a point now where we do have to spend a fair bit of time thinking through issues of criminal justice. And it does seem to me that we're in it's a little bit of a renaissance now, I suppose, of writing in and around that too. And I think we all have to dig in and try to learn what we can about, where that came from, how we might do better, how we might find a way to not always fall back on the prisons to solve every social problem that we have. And so I think investment there makes sense in, serious thinking, serious reading and discussion there as well.
Very good. You're in Du Bois country here, or we like to think of ourselves as having this special relationship and respect. The papers are here in our library. My department is his. Shirley Graham Du Bois taught. His stepson David Graham Du Bois taught. We definitely teach and promote greater learning around W.B. Du Bois. Our W.B. Du Bois Center, headed by Whitney Battle Baptiste, is trying to get that message out more and more. So we really do, appreciate that emphasis, and so put it on your reading list for 2017, Black Reconstruction. If you start now in February, you can finish it by the end of the year. No, it'll be well, very good reading. And so we thank you for coming, and as always, keep up the good work that you're doing out there.
Thanks so much for having me.